First of all, is everyone okay? Can anybody else believe that it was Seth Rollins under that mask? Can we believe that? Yeah, so Elimination Chambers happened, and is anybody else just not feeling very WrestleMania-y right now? Some of the Mania card feels very predictable, some of it feels quite unpredictable still, and, there's been a lot of discourse around the word predictable since Elimination Chamber and a couple of the things that happened. I'll get into that in a bit. But what I will say straight off the bat is, I don't think it matters how predictable or unpredictable the booking is if the intent behind it doesn't feel right. If the intent behind a booking decision is short-sighted, it's very hard to disguise that. It feels as though audiences pick up on that very easily indeed. And I think that is a key theme as to why this year's Road to WrestleMania is feeling a little bit flat. My name's Jatha Jobber, and this is a bit of wrestling analysis as we hurtle along said road. Welcome. Everyone's been saying it this year. I've seen a lot of videos on it on YouTube, I've seen a lot of tweets about it and posts on Reddit and everything. This year's Road to WrestleMania feels quite flat. AJ Styles himself said on a recent appearance on the Raw recap that, WrestleMania has lost its luster somewhat over the past few years. I think you can narrow it down though, what he said. I think that this year specifically, WrestleMania has lost its luster. And if you need another WWE superstar to ask, just ask Roman Reigns. What on earth was this tweet about? Yeah, that is a brutal post to make about your own WrestleMania program with CM Punk. And people might say, well, this is kind of in character for Roman. And I remember him acting like this in the build to WrestleMania 40, of course. He said some nasty things about Seth Rollins never getting a pop. But he was a heel then. And the only person this helps make look good is, of course, Roman Reigns. I find it a little bit selfish, but obviously very funny too. But I guess the point is, and this doesn't just apply to the build to the Roman CM Punk match, this applies to the build to WrestleMania as a whole. It only now feels like things are just getting started. But we're already halfway down the road to WrestleMania. It's in 6 weeks' time. And it's a weird one because there's been all these reports suggesting that Triple H is maybe panicking a little bit and changing things quite last second. But if that is indeed the case, why hasn't that at the very least injected a sense of urgency? We're getting all the kind of slapdash nature of changing plans at the last minute without any of the residual benefit, which is that at least things feel quite chaotic and exciting. No, we're getting the panic of last minute changes, but it still feels kind of underwhelming. It's the worst of both worlds. And I think the problem is that even these new last-minute switcheroos, these new plans, don't really feel like they've got much momentum or energy behind them at all. They've just been presented to us quite plainly. It's as if WWE have forgotten that this is meant to be the build to the biggest wrestling show of the year. Every year, this is the grandest stage of them all, and WWE aren't fully engaging with that, it feels like. You always used to be able to rely on, even during years when the product was really, really awful, you could still rely on the period of time between the Royal Rumble and WrestleMania feeling bigger, feeling more important, feeling different to the rest of the year. Even if that didn't necessarily end with WrestleMania itself being good on any particular occasion, the build still felt important. And I think the past 2 years are a perfect example of this, ending in very different ways, of course. In 2024, you had The Rock seemingly about to torpedo Cody Rhodes' push, torpedo the finishing of his story, but then WWE kind of rolled with this chaos and made something even better out of it, harnessing a great deal of crowd energy in the process. But then the following year, it obviously ended badly with the very underwhelming John Cena Cody Rhodes main event and Travis Scott and all that sort of stuff, but the build felt huge still. The build still felt big with John Cena's heel turn kind of setting the internet alight for a while. Once again, my point is that regardless of whether it actually ends successfully with a good WrestleMania, the build always feels big and makes the upcoming Mania feel like a big unmissable show, but it doesn't feel like that in 2026. Now let's talk about this in relation to the pay-per-view we've just seen recently, Elimination Chamber, or the PLE, excuse me. On one side, let's talk about the two men's world title pictures. On one side of the equation, we've got what feels like quite a predictable course of events, CM Punk, Roman Reigns. And on the other hand, even though a match is now apparently set in stone with Randy Orton taking on Drew McIntyre for the WWE Championship, that doesn't quite feel as certain, does it? Let's start with the more straightforward one, Punk versus Roman. They absolutely can have a good match at the end of everything at WrestleMania, and I have no doubt that they can build an engaging, interesting feud to set up to that match. But I think a lot of that depends on how involved Roman is, given the very part-time nature of his schedule usually. But I think the problem is wider than just this feud. It's more about what this feud means as a broader booking decision in the grand scheme of things. Because from the moment that Roman Reigns won the Royal Rumble back at the end of January, this has felt like a step backwards for WWE overall. Let's look at that Roman tweet again. Oh my God, it's brutal. This is not the first time in recent months that Roman has been very surprisingly outspoken about the theme of things generally not being as good anymore compared to when he was on top. That's because he came out and said very similar things, I believe, around Rumble time itself. And it didn't feel like a particularly in-character kind of thing for Roman to say either. He wasn't talking about trying his best to get back on top and win wrestling matches and win titles and all that sort of stuff. No, it felt more, and this is just my opinion, but I think a lot of people agreed at the time, it felt more like he was echoing a real backstage sentiment. If Roman beats Punk at WrestleMania for the World Heavyweight Championship, is that a good thing necessarily? I'll get accused of like being a huge CM Punk fanboy, of course, but I don't even think that Punk is the best candidate to be the World Heavyweight Champion right now. But with this match going ahead, if Roman beats Punk, which he is surely favoured to do, that feels to me far more like a purely business data-driven decision, than a one with any sort of creative spark behind it or an interest in crafting a good story. You know, this guy was on top of the business for years and it worked. Now he's no longer on top of the business and things have taken a bit of a creative downturn. So rather than try and find an imaginative way to get out of this jam with good booking, let's just go back to what worked in the past. Well, I think that is a recipe for diminishing returns. It also just feels lazy to me from WWE Creative. Like, I understand that everything in wrestling really is a business decision, but usually it's better disguised as something more creative or something more compelling for the fans, an interesting story or setting up an interesting match. But in this case, it very clearly feels like a marketing decision with Roman back on top again. And once again, I know like they probably will have a good match and they probably will build it well on the mic and everything because they're two fantastic talkers. But underneath that all, you can tell what this really is. And it's also quite clearly plan B as well, isn't it? Because if we look at the end of War Games last year, it was very strongly implied that we were going to be getting Cody versus Roman again. Plans have since changed. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think that having another Cody-Roman match at WrestleMania would have been the answer or well received by the fans. But it feels like WWE have flipped to another option first without kind of doing all the work in between. They've just gone, nope, actually we're going to go this way, and then we'll think of a reason after. And I feel quite crazy saying that because Punk and Roman are two of the most charismatic stars in the entire world. But is that enough to disguise the fact that there's really no groundwork that's been put in? This is a feud pretty much built on nothing. I know that sounds quite harsh as well. You might argue, well, it's just a match. It's just like a big match between two big stars and it doesn't need to be deeper than that. But I think WWE are trying to present it as something deeper than that and want us to buy into that without us having any justification for doing so. Because they keep on referring to it now as like one of the biggest WrestleMania main events of all time. Michael Cole kept saying that on commentary during the Chamber PLE. And now it's a situation where I think WWE want us to pretend like this has been built better than it actually has been. This is the main event of WrestleMania. It should be the biggest story of the year. Once we get to the end of 2026, I very much doubt that Punk versus Roman is going to be the biggest story in WWE all calendar year. But I'll happily be proven wrong, and I hope they knock it out of the park. I really do. Now let's talk about the other side of the equation and what all went down in the men's Elimination Chamber match. And as I mentioned earlier, I want to talk for a second about the word predictable in wrestling. Because with the masked man who kept attacking the Vision being revealed in the Chamber match to be Seth Rollins after all, oh my God, and with CM Punk beating Finn Balor in his World Heavyweight title defense as well, I've seen the line trotted out a lot on social media in the hours since that all took place, basically saying, you know, predictable doesn't necessarily mean bad, right? That's how you end up with Russo booking. And it is true. It is a true thing. I've used that sentiment before myself to justify a point, you know. The most obvious course of action in wrestling often is also the best one. Those two things often coincide. Cody beating Roman finally at WrestleMania 40 was the obvious way to go, and they did it, and it worked. To use an example from a different promotion, Hangman Page being the one to finally dethrone Kenny Omega. Again, very predictable. We all knew that was going to happen, and it did, and we were glad. And it's right as well to say that if you try and swerve people for this, just for the sake of swerving people, then you do end up with like the worst of Vince Russo. You do end up with the dark last days of WCW or the worst of TNA over the years. Those sort of pointless angles just for the sake of fooling the audience at the expense of creating a good story. But let's make one thing very, very clear, which I don't think has been said nearly enough in the wake of Elimination Chamber. Yes, predictable doesn't necessarily mean bad, but predictable also doesn't necessarily mean good. Predictable is only good if it feels earned. And obviously Cody beating Roman at WrestleMania 40 felt earned, of course it did. But on the other hand, I don't think Rollins being the mystery man felt earned at all. It felt like we are stupid. No way, the guy who's been attacking the Vision turns out to be the guy who was kicked out of the Vision and has the biggest motivation to get revenge on the Vision, and that's who it was it? I can't believe Seth Rollins was the guy hitting Seth Rollins' moves. It wouldn't have bothered me as much were it not for the response that WWE gave us, the big deal they made of it. Did you hear Paul Heyman losing his mind? Did you hear the announce team losing their minds? WWE wanted us to think that this was the shock of the century, and it just wasn't. I think they think we're stupid. I think this feels like watching the Teletubbies. And it's been pointed out to me, but Rollins was going to be injured, so the shock is that he was the one who was attacking them even though he was injured. Well, I don't care about that. Of course it was him. I think the main suspect in 99% of people's minds in storyline is Seth Rollins. I know they've used body doubles or whatever, but the kayfabe culprit, of course, is Seth Rollins. We all knew that, and now we're meant to act like we didn't. Am I losing my mind? I think the work shoot injury last year with Seth's cash-in and everything, I think that's to blame here, especially bolstered by WWE Unreal Season 2, the docuseries, the behind the curtain expose, because the tone of that was very much like, we've tricked everybody with Seth's worked injury, even though they didn't trick everybody, but they tricked some people. And that was like the whole grand theme around which the season was built. And now they want to do it again. Seth's fooled the world again. But this time, even less people were fooled. Almost nobody. Predictable doesn't necessarily mean bad, but my God, it doesn't necessarily mean good as well. Right, anyway, that's out of the way. On to, finally, the result of the men's chamber. Randy Orton getting the win. So yeah, this one is not as predictable as Punk versus Roman seems to be. People don't even really seem convinced that Randy versus Drew is going to be the match that we end up with at WrestleMania. And it's since been announced, hasn't it, that Drew is going to have to defend the belt against Cody Rhodes. Is it on this upcoming SmackDown? Very soon, anyway. And on one hand, I understand why. I'm going to try my best not to be shocked if we do actually end up with just Drew versus Randy. Because WWE don't seem recently to be that interested in pushing the boat out creatively with storylines. But on the other hand, I think I'm going to have to agree with the majority here. And I don't think that singles match is what we're going to end up with. Everyone knows this already, simply because there are so many other people tied to this title scene, it would feel like a huge waste of everyone. Like Cody and Drew hate each other right now. Jacob and Drew hate each other right now. We still don't know who attacked Jacob. Have they just left that alone, or are we going to find out eventually? Sammy hates Drew, but he's also very suspicious of Jacob. Jey Uso got beaten down by somebody we don't know the identity of yet. Cody and Sammy, what's going on there? Like, they've got this intense respect for each other, but you feel like one or both of them could just flip at any time. There's a lot more going on than just Randy versus Drew. So I think rightly, a lot of people suspect that this is going to end up a multi-man match of some description, whether that's 3, 4, 5, 6 even. This could be one of various different match types. Especially with Punk Roman feeling like quite a one-dimensional build with minimal backstory. I think if we did that again with Randy and Drew, it would feel similarly flat. So I do hope things kind of get complicated in the road to the WWE title match. But again, in the grand scheme of things, I'm worried for what this means going forwards beyond WrestleMania. Like what I said about Roman presumably ending up on top again. Randy seems to have been put in this position because he is a huge name still, and they want to sell more tickets, man. That seems to be the only reason. Again, it feels like a bit of a Less of a creative storytelling kind of decision and more of just a purely business-driven one, where they've not even tried to dress it up like anything creative. On the other hand, it has only just happened, so we're going to have to see how it plays out and how they dress it up going forwards. This brings us to the women's title pictures, which, once again, I think the same theme applies, and it feels like the jigsaw hasn't quite been pieced together, but the image it makes is like the most expensive one possible. Metaphor makes no sense. Actually, no. Liv Morgan versus Stephanie Vaquer, that feels like two very current stars. And that feels like something that has indeed been earned. I'll give that one, out of the 4 world title pictures, that is the one I think that I am most positive about. I don't quite like the direction the feud itself has gone in yet, with Steph making Liv cry backstage and everything. That wasn't the way I was expecting it to go. But once again, on the whole, I'm quite alright with that matchup. But the other one over on SmackDown with Jade Cargill, who, as we all know, has barely defended the title since she won it months ago, taking on the Women's Elimination Chamber winner, Rhea Ripley. And once again, this just appears to be an example of Triple H plugging a big name, Rhea Ripley, into a title feud at WrestleMania because there appears to have been a bit of a late panic behind the scenes as April approaches. Sounds like a Screamo band, as April approaches. Yeah, I like that. I think if I'm right, Jade and Rhea have never even been in the same match before. They have precisely 0 history to build this feud upon, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. In a more varied card, in a different year, then I'd be fine with that, I think. But I don't think it works in the context of WrestleMania 42. You can't expect an entire Mania card to be a series of epic conclusions to age-old rivalries. Of course not. You need some fresh matchups in there, and Rhea versus Jade is inarguably a fresh matchup. But you don't want things to go too far the other way either. You want a balance. And I don't think this Mania has achieved that balance now that we know most of the title matches. I think that it feels like a series of matchups that have been thrown together to sell tickets and to draw big numbers. And that's, that's modern WWE. It's booking by sheer brute force is what it is. There's no storytelling finesse. There's no kind of deft workarounds to end up where you want things to be. There's no booking backwards in the old school sense of the term, where you've got your idea of the card at the end and you work up to that. No, this feels really short term and really not entirely meaningless, but like approaching that way. What about the rest of the card? I think that a lot of that depends on how exactly the Drew McIntyre match is fleshed out, because depending on how many people are involved in that besides just Randy and Drew, then I think they could be slotted into other parts of the card as well. Like, is Cody gonna have to help Seth deal with the Vision because he still owes Seth for back at WrestleMania 40? Shouts out to Football Manager Legend on YouTube, Dr. Benji, for suggesting that one there. As for the other belts further down the card, I mean, the tag team divisions we've been taught by now don't matter, really. And the US and IC titles could way more likely be defended on like the Go Home SmackDown and the Raw after Mania rather than the big weekend itself. A Becky Lynch and AJ Lee rematch seems likely. I don't know how popular that would prove to be, given that a lot of people were quite critical of their match this past weekend, and also it would surely be very predictable with Becky scooping the revenge victory. And of course, we've got the Brock Lesnar Open Challenge. Who's it going to be? We don't actually. It could be Danhausen. Oh, a lot of making of videos just making stupid noises, isn't it? I think on the whole, a big reason that this build to WrestleMania, this road, feels so comparatively flat to other years. Once again, even in years where the Mania itself has ended up being bad, but the road has felt more electrifying. I think a big reason this one feels so flat is that the booking has been really conservative. I mean, Punk, Roman, Drew, and Randy, they're the 4 people currently in the 2 world title matches in the men's division. Quite probably the 2 main events of the weekend as well, you would probably have to guess. They're huge names, of course, but my point is, like, so? What about the new blood? What about the emerging new talent? What about the part of wrestling that we all love and that we all live for? Seeing how things play out rather than exist in this sort of stasis, which is how it feels currently in WWE. Like, pushes are so slow in WWE right now. Glacially slow, as people, I mentioned this in my video essay, that no more art, no more heroes, like how people have to really slowly drag themselves up through WWE's system, and it's portrayed as this epic climb to the top. But I don't know how much that actually helps the on-screen product. And I think that a lot of talent are just getting older and not progressing as much as the years go by. Sometimes a push happens and there's a burst of activity at the start, like Bron Breakker taking out Roman Reigns last year and aligning with Paul Heyman in shocking fashion. But then, you know, that sort of died off quite quickly. He's had bad luck with injuries too. But really, Bron Breakker is the outlier. And most people just kind of get trapped in this slow-moving rat race. You can see that problem in action in the men's Elimination Chamber match, where a hugely positive response was given to two people in particular, Trick Williams and Javon Evans, these two recent NXT call-ups, so fresh, so exciting, and they were basically fed to Logan Paul to make him a bigger, more sneaky heel, and then ultimately make the Seth Rollins reveal feel all the more sweet when it happened. But Trick and Javon, you've done your job for now. Well done, guys. Like, no, these should be guys who form the basis of some of your stories heading into big shows like WrestleMania, you know? Their rise to the top should be a really exciting time, not a slow-moving, inch-by-inch process. Obafemi is another example, although there is a lot of speculation that he could end up being Brock Lesnar's opponent in that open challenge. And if he is, we'll have to reserve judgment on that, because as we know, Brock Lesnar's Mania matches vary wildly in terms of quality depending on kind of how much he cares at any given time. And also, I'd really want Oba to win that. I mean, if Oba were to lose, I think that would be a brilliant microcosm of the problem here. Good job, kid. You did it. You earned your opportunity on the grandest stage of them all. And you weren't quite good enough to get it done yet. But maybe one day in the future. You know, it's very conservative booking. And if that would happen, that would be just another example of it. I should point out as well that, you know, this isn't anything we haven't seen before. It's just that over the past few years, WWE seemed really invested in building towards WrestleMania, making the road feel huge and important. But there have been bad roads to WrestleMania in the past. And I think a very interesting example here is WrestleMania 31. I mean, that main event was dreaded heading into that show. Brock versus Roman again. But Roman was like this massively polarizing babyface that a lot of people vocally did not want to see win. And then they did the cash-in with Seth Rollins. But even before Seth cashed in that match, it was booked in quite shocking and surprising fashion, with Brock just beating Roman down and then Roman having to valiantly fight from underneath, rather than it being, you know, a kind of a slow heel beatdown. It felt totally one-sided and shocking and brutal, and we were wondering if Roman was even going to be able to come back in the match. It was done really well. And then the Seth thing as well just sent everyone home very happy. What I mean by this is that there's still plenty of time until WrestleMania. And, you know, WWE are more than capable of pulling victory from the jaws of defeat by the time of WrestleMania 42. We've seen them do it before, like with 31. Really, all we've got to go off when trying to predict how good WrestleMania will be is WWE's recent form. And recently the product has been unimaginative, I think quite startlingly lacking in care or detail. And I think also it's just felt very undaring. It's been an undaring wrestling product. You know that story that went around last year about Netflix higher-ups telling screenwriters to try and add more blatant exposition to their scripts and try and kind of just generally dumb things down because a lot of audiences watch while they're glued to their phone at the same time? Kind of how WWE feels at the moment, with these long gaps between matches and the constant repetition of very simple storyline beats just so we can take in what's going on. And by the way, this Mania quite needs to be good as well, like, because next year's WrestleMania is in Saudi Arabia, of course, so even WWE's core audience of kind of loyalists are probably going to feel more detached from it than usual, even if the build is better than this year's build. So really, WWE kind of need to nail WrestleMania 42, or we could be looking at a run of 3 very badly received WrestleManias in a row. 41, 42, and then 43 next year in Riyadh. That's very presumptuous, of course. Like, they could still turn things around, you know? But it doesn't feel that way currently. It's a real shame. And they might try and make it seem like a big deal with numbers and ticket sales and sponsorships and all the celebrities in the crowd and everything. But it's not huge in the way that should be most important to wrestling fans. And that is that it doesn't feel exciting in terms of the storylines, and it doesn't feel exciting in terms of the wrestling. Damn it. I've been Jack the Jobber. We'll see how it goes, and thank you very much for watching this video. Do leave your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Like, share, and subscribe to the video, and all the rest of it, and I'll see you very soon.